then on our way back from Juarez, we actually saw deportees that from the United States, on the Mexico side of things. So we were like walking towards the bridge to walk back to the US, and there was just like a lot of National Guards and the guns and everything, and we're like what's going on? And then towards the side we saw like 3 vans, and it was confirmed that there were deportees in those vans, and that's why the National Guard was there. And it just infuriated me. Like, so many emotions on this trip, but like in that moment I was just so upset again of just everything that was going on. So it was just like we just saw things firsthand right then and there of like the changes that was going on, and it was very impactful. But one thing that I realized on this trip was I know a lot more about immigration than I thought I did. Because one of the days, like, they really go into like I said, like, not just immigration here in the United States, but they actually talk about the global effect. Because when you look at it in a global space, like the U.S. really doesn't bring in that much refugees.
Yeah.
If anything, I think it's like less than 3% of the refugee population that we actually accept, which is really a low number.
You're listening to the Dali Talks podcast, where my mom, Dali, empowers parents like you with parenting tips. My mom's mission is to help parents make their child raising experience easier and more enjoyable by sharing valuable lessons to save them unnecessary struggles. The Dali Talks podcast is for any person already parenting or planning on parenting a child. Each week you'll hear different experts talk with my mom about important aspects of parenting, self-care, and of course our specialized area of bullying awareness and prevention. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, go ahead and do so now wherever you may be listening.
Heidi, thank you so much for being back on the Dali Talks podcast. It's been 2 years since you were last here. So those of you tuning in, episode 14, and it is called, I wrote it down so I don't forget, how much you really know about immigrants. And so that's what I want to,
wow.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that today. But first, let's tell our audience who you are and what you do.
Yes. So, Heidy De La Cruz, I am the podcast host of the award-winning podcast, The American Dream and the Eyes of Immigrants. I think when I first came on, I want to say I had just started, because this year's going on 3 years with the podcast. And you were also on mine sharing your immigration story, which was so incredible. But yeah, so I host the American Dream and the Eyes of Immigrants, and I host a weekly personal development newsletter on Substack called Into My Thoughts. And then I also blog about podcasting and online marketing. So I usually send out weekly blog posts, podcasting tips, online marketing. So like last week, I talked about Pinterest and why we should use Pinterest as marketing. And so I'm married with 2 kiddos. My daughter is 11 and my son is 3. My son just started school, which was so crazy. So now they're both in school, and so now it's all quiet during the day while me and my husband work. We're still getting used to that. And yeah, that's me. That's what I do.
Yeah, wow, that's some change. I remember when my kids, both of them were in school. I remember my husband back then and I were like, oh my God, we're gonna go home and we're gonna have some wine in the morning just because we can. And no, it did not turn out that way. We ended up both
No.
Yeah, like our little one, she cried and she thought we were abandoning her. It was traumatic. Well, not traumatic, but at the time it seemed traumatic for both of us, all of us. But anyway, yeah.
Oh man, those first 2 days, I was so nervous. I was like waiting by my phone to make sure like that the teacher sent an email and updates and stuff. And then like on the second day, I missed him more than the first day. So I was like counting down the hours. So like, okay, it's time to go pick him up. I was so nervous, but it's been a few weeks now. So we're easing into the new routine.
That's crazy how time flies. Cause I remember when you posted like that you had just had him. I mean, time just flies. A lot has changed. I have enjoyed so many of the stories that you share on your award-winning podcast. And by the way, congratulations, because that is huge. That is a lot of work you put into it. And you've shared just amazing stories. So let's tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast started because I'm a child of immigrants. So my parents came to the US in the 90s. I was born in New York, raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and now I'm in Florida. And I feel like I've just always been surrounded by immigrants. One, my whole family immigrated. They each had their own journeys of coming to the US. But then also like hearing about like my stepmom having to study for her citizenship test and all the fees that they had to pay and helping my dad translate and things like that. And then like when my stepmom decided to bring her petition for her parents so they could come over because they had visitors visa, so they had the 10-year one, and so like the maximum time that they could be here was 6 months, so they would spend 6 months here and then they will go back to DR for 6 months and then traveling back and forth. And then it just got to the point where it was like, why don't they just the family's here, why not move them too? And so I feel like I've always been surrounded by the immigration process, so I've always kind of just known how complex it is, how expensive it is, and things like that. So then my husband also immigrant. He's an immigrant. His family immigrated also from the Dominican Republic. He actually was 9 years old when he came. And so I've always been a big podcaster, like listener. So I love listening to podcasts. But I realize it's specific storytelling podcasts. So I love listening to people's stories. I love learning about other people, their journeys, stuff that they go through, and then what they learn, and sharing those lessons. And you can learn a lot from other people's stories. So I'm very big on that. And then I realized too, like when I read memoirs. Like I love reading memoirs and just other people's stories.
Yeah.
And so I always say like God put it in my heart in 2019 to start the podcast. And I was like, okay, I know that it's going to be interview based, but it was like, okay, who do I want to interview, right? Like what stories is it that I want to share? But 2019, I was in the middle of my master's program. So finishing up school. So I wasn't able to do it then. 2020 with COVID, I was not able to focus and start it then. Although a lot of people did start podcasts in 2020. And then 2021, I was pregnant with my son. So focusing on the pregnancy and the health, because that's a whole story right there with his pregnancy. And so I was actually on maternity leave in 2022, like in the beginning of 2022, because he was born in December of 21. And I was like, okay, so I have a little bit of time now. I'm on maternity leave. I'm not working. God still has it in my heart to start this podcast. Let's get the ball rolling. So as I'm Googling literally like how to launch a podcast, I'm like gathering all the information on like how to start, what equipment do I need and all that. And then finally I got to the point where it was like, okay, what is this podcast going to be about? And who am I going to talk to? And so as I mentioned, I'm a writer. I actually came across an article on Medium, and it was an immigrant from Kenya. And she was sharing each cultural shock that she experienced in the United States, like really diminished her confidence. And I was reading this article and I was like, there's so much that goes into the immigration process. And there's so much that immigrants go through once they get to the US that's not talked about. And so like the article like really made me sad. I'm like, oh my gosh, like she's really like questioning her intelligence. She's questioning like her identity. It just really hit me. And so I remember going to my husband after reading the article. And I was like, hey, like I just read this article. You came when you were 9 years old. Like, do you remember how you felt? Like, were you excited? Were you not? Like, did you not want to leave? And so he's telling me his story as a 9-year-old, his perspective. And as I'm listening to him talk, I'm like, okay, this is what the podcast is going to be about. I am going to share immigrant stories. And then I was like, I want to specifically talk about like, depending on what age they come, right? So we talk about how was it like back home? If they're comfortable sharing what events happened, that they ended up moving to the US, cultural shocks that they experienced, just because it is a whole different country, new language, new food, new culture. So it's just like, what really stood out to you that was so different in the US versus back home? We talk about if they were able to visit back home, how that experience was, because a lot of immigrants do not have the privilege to be able to visit back home. And then we talk about business. Like the majority of my guests are all business owners. Or they either have like a side hustle with their 9 to 5, or they're just full on entrepreneurs. So I love to highlighting that and highlighting like what got them to start their business, what do they do, and things like that. Because there's that whole misconception of the immigrants are coming to steal our jobs, when in reality they're actually creating jobs by starting their own businesses and providing their own income. And so, yeah, I try to stay away from the politics of it all because I feel like it's so messy. And I just want to highlight the stories, right? I want to highlight the immigration part of their story, which is crazy to think about, that a lot of times when they tell me that this is the first time they're actually sharing that part of their story, because people don't ask, they're not curious enough to care. And that to me is mind-blowing, because I'm such a curious person naturally. And I'm just like, how do people not ask? Like, but so they usually thank me for providing the safe space to share that part of their story. And yeah, so 3 years ago, that's how the podcast came about. Last year, I won the Women in Podcasting Award for the category Society and Culture, which was still crazy to think about that it did. But that was also big thanks to my community, because I had to get people to vote. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, you guys, you just got to vote once. Just one vote is all I need. And so I had the most votes for that category. So that's how I won that. So it was really, really cool.
It was amazing to see you win. And I remember I voted as soon as I saw that you posted. I was like, I'm going on in there.
Thank you.
Because it is one of my favorite podcasts. But you mentioned a few things that are, I think, things that people don't think about until you hear about it, right? Like the conversation you were having with your husband about him coming over here and how he felt. That's actually something that I can relate to, because I remember on your podcast I shared that I felt like very insulted at the age of 7 that I had been knocked down a grade. Like, how dare you insult my intelligence,
Yeah. And it's
so
funny because that happened to him. He was 9, so mm-hmm. I believe he was in 3rd grade. And so he came and they put him in 2nd grade because he didn't know English. But then he actually got to skip 5th grade. So like once he got to 5th grade that he knew English, he actually got to skip. And that actually came up recently because my daughter's in 5th grade now and they're doing their 5th grade science project, right. Which I remember we had to do a big science project at 5th grade. So then I was like asking my husband, I was like, hey, what was your science project? He was like, no, I skipped 5th grade. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So you didn't get to experience that.
Right. You know what? I don't even remember if I participated in that, because part of it feels like a blur in childhood. There's so much that happens and you feel like you're trying to catch up. But but yeah, so what have been some of those things that give you that aha moment when speaking to your guests?
Wow, I really realized that we are more alike than what we are different, even though people come from all different countries in the world. So, for example, I interviewed this girl. Her parents were born in India. So she is a child of immigrants. And so she's talking about her experience growing up with immigrant Indian parents. And her episode is not published yet. It'll be out later this year. But I just remember her talking about her experience. Her parents really wanted to keep their Indian traditions. Like, yes, you have to adapt when you live here in the United States, but there's you can either go either way, right? Immigrants, either they fully embrace the American culture, or they try to keep some traditions, or a mix of both, right? And so, but her parents were like, no, we live here, but we are Indians. We are going to continue our traditions, eat our food and things like that. And so as she's talking about her experience with like what her parents didn't allow her to do, she went through like this rebellion stage when she was a teenager, kind of wanting to show them off and be like, I'm going to do what I want to do and things like that. So she's sharing all this experience. And I was like, man, me too. Like, my dad didn't let me do that either. Or I had to like ask permission for this too. And it was just crazy to me that like, her parents came from the other side of the world, from India. My parents came from the Caribbean. And yet there were so many things similar with our upbringing that I'm just like, yeah, we are way more alike than what we are different. And so that's one of the things that I'm learning with this podcast and just listening to the people's stories.
Yeah, I found out that, so I didn't know that we are more alike. I mean, I kind of figured, but I have no confirmation aside from hearing you now. But where I noticed it was the food, because I remember I like to Google random things. So I'm a lover of plátanos, whether they're maduros or the not ripe ones, because I love from tostones from mango to like just plátano frito with cheese, and my mouth is salivating right now just thinking about it. But I googled, like which country consumes the most plantains, and it was a East African country. I can't remember right now which one. And I was so surprised.
Yeah.
And also the exporters, they're the largest consumers and exporters of plantains. And this whole time growing up, I thought it just comes from Latin America. I was so arrogant to think that. Too, it really.
I was actually going to tell you. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if you knew that a lot of our foods, like the plantain dishes and stuff, like they actually come from Africa because of the slave trade.
Yeah.
And I learned that in a documentary on Netflix. I can't remember what the documentary is about, but it was talking about like that, like the history of food and like where. And yeah, a lot of our food, especially in the Caribbean islands, like comes from Africa because of the slave trade. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we eat a lot of similar foods.
Right, which makes the culinary arts so much more interesting, that you can take one ingredient and you can cook it and consume it in so many different ways. It's incredible. It's beautiful. It just shows the intelligence of humans and the creativity. And also, that commonality, right? It's really cool that you can bond with a total stranger just talking about plantains. Or about how your dad didn't let you,
Yes. Now that we're on food, one of my big dreams with the podcast is actually to incorporate food in it.
Ooh.
So I've been throwing it out there, and I know it's going to happen, but it's either the guests themselves, if they feel comfortable cooking a traditional dish of their home country, and then like talking about the ingredients, talking about the history, and like when do they typically eat it, because like for us, plátanos, we eat it morning, lunch, dinner, for everything.
Yeah.
And so incorporating that food into it, and then once we're done, getting the food ready, sitting down and then having them share their immigration story, because food is so big in cultures, and you can learn so much from food. So that's one of my big dreams with the podcast, to be able to incorporate either the food part of it. I've also been thinking about like, because I'm in Central Florida, so there's a lot of, restaurants from Colombia, from Peru, from all over. And I would love to be able to go and interview the owners of the restaurant, and then share, their immigration story as well. So God willingly, it will happen.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited just hearing you talk about it, because that would be so eye-opening for so many people. So especially for people like me, because first of all, I'm Nicaraguense, and it is so rare for me to find another Nicaraguan person. And the one place in 1999, when I came to Silver Springs, Maryland, to meet my soon-to-be mother-in-law back then, I discovered a whole new world of Central Americans. And then my first question was, why in the world would you come to Maryland? Because it's so cold. It's not,
Yes.
I was like, why?
Yep.
But I was like, oh my gosh, my people are here. I'm like, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Same thing with Grand Rapids. Like there's like a whole community of Dominicans, and it's like, why are you so up north? Like, why it's so cold up here?
Right. So for me to find cultural, like just restaurants that are diverse in where I live now, and I've always lived in areas like that because I was in the military for a long time, and I just ended up in this area because the base is right out, really close to me. That was my last duty station. But there's really not a lot of culture here like that, like variety. I remember I moved away for about 6 years, went back to California after I got out the army. I came back 6 years later to Maryland, the same house I was living in. And then I discovered there's a new like Latino store, and a Filipino owns an international food store, and I was just so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, that means there's more Latinos and like more people.
Yep.
And like people from other countries here, so it's like becoming more diverse. It's still really behind compared to like areas like Silver Spring closer to DC, but it's exciting, and it's important for me to explore. Like this weekend my daughter and I are gonna drive all the way up to Philly, which is like a 2-hour drive, just because we want to go try this Peruvian restaurant, just make a trip out of it. Like I've done that. I've been to Philly to this Cuban. I went to the Colombian one. I like wherever I go to DC all the time, because that is not accessible to me, and I also want to make sure that my child, and my other one, she's not living here. She's an adult now. She's moved out, but like usually she'll go with us too. But I like exposing them to that, because one of the most fun ways that I've learned to learn about other people is listening to podcasts like yours, or just talking to people about their story. And food is such a connector. Food, my gosh. Yeah. And I wish I would have been able to raise my kids in diverse areas. It just didn't happen that way. So now that we're all pretty much grown, like the youngest one is 17, now we just like up and go. The one thing I'm still having a hard time is having them listen to podcasts, because they're like, they're 13, these teenagers. Unless it's about
I feel like podcasts is like a millennial thing.
Yes,
for some reason.
Or unless they're into like K-pop, because K-pop is dominating so many spaces, and these young ones in their K-pop, they're listening to stuff all the time on YouTube and podcasts about it. But thank you. So what else would you say you've realized that your guests have taught you?
I have realized that a lot of people come here for opportunities. Like, because the name of my podcast is The American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants. So it's like seeing the American dream through the eyes of people who choose to come, unless they're kids, then, their parents made that decision for them. But they chose to come live in the United States. Some really didn't have the choice, in case, like, if they come because there was a war in their country or things like that. But I just learning about like the reason why, or what the American dream means to them. The majority of people say is the opportunities that this country provides, that they wouldn't have back in their home country for whatever reason. And so that word comes up a lot. Opportunities. And they all mention that they've worked hard to get to where they're at, but this country still provides, you're still capable of doing what you want, right? Even though there are challenges and obstacles in the way, as opposed to other countries, unfortunately. Like if there is a wall there, like there's a wall, there's like nothing that you can do about it. So it's been really interesting to hear what their American dream is. But and then also they recently I've been hearing a lot that like, oh, if you would have asked me this like 5 years ago, I would have said, the house and the car and the kids. But like now it's different. It's more of like opportunities and freedom. So I feel like even as we get older as adults, like sometimes our goals change, or like what we finally figure out, like what is important in our life. So it's like, okay, this is what I thought was important 10 years ago. But like now that I'm 10 years older and wiser, I realized that wasn't as important as what, this really is. And so they have mentioned that their American dream has changed, and it probably will continue to change as they get older and start a new phase of life and things like that. So I've learned that. And when I interview like attorneys, I do ask them to like provide, misconceptions that they hear about immigration, or tell us about, what type of visas they actually work with. Because believe it or not, for those who may not know, the immigration, oh my gosh, the immigration's space is so complex. Like just the process to be able to get permanent residency is so complex. So, for example, just yesterday I was in a meeting. We were talking about the situation that's going on right now with the undocumented children. Yeah. And so there was an attorney that was there. She was answering questions and then also providing like, okay, this is the actual facts of what's going on and this is how we can help and stuff. And then she even mentioned, she was like, the immigration space is very complex, all the laws and everything. And she was like, I know about this type of immigration, like unaccompanied children or asylum seekers, refugees and stuff. She was like, there's a whole side of immigration that like has to do with like business and employee and stuff like that. And she was like, I don't know that side of stuff. I only know this side. And so that's the thing when I interview immigration attorneys, I like them to share about their specialty. Because just because you're an immigration attorney doesn't mean that you know everything or that you accept all types of cases, right? Because there's just so much that can happen. And I've learned about various different visas or various different ways that people can actually come to the U.S. So one thing that I learned in my podcast is the au pair program, which is a nanny program in exchange. So like people can come, there'll be a nanny for a year, but in exchange, like they have to go to school and usually it's to learn English. So like you have a live-in nanny with a family. They have to work like if it was like a 9 to 5. So you have to like provide them a room. You have to give them like, weekends off and time off and stuff like that. And then they go to school to learn English. So I've had a few guests that came with that visa. Their intent was to, just learn English and then go back home, but they were able to find opportunities to stay. And I had no idea that was even an option until I started this podcast. I've learned about, unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, there's visas that helps like victim of like domestic violence, victims of trafficking, and stuff like that. Because unfortunately, when people are in vulnerable positions, like if they're undocumented, people take advantage of that and they will say like, they're threatening you, like, I'm gonna, report you and things like that. And so like they exploit them, whether that is with work, whether that is sexually, and so there is visas for people who have reported the abuse. There are visas to help victims of abuse and things like that to be able to get permanent residency. Again, all of these things I've learned on this podcast. I really admire attorneys who were immigrants themselves, because going to law school is not easy at all. And then they're doing this in a language that's not their native tongue. So I truly, truly admire them to want to help people who were in their shoes and being able to help them navigate through this complicated system that we have here, this complicated, outdated system that we have here in the United States. I want to say that. And also authors too. I've got to interview authors. I've heard that I think like the percentage of people who want to be a published author is very high, but it's only like 2 or 3% of people that actually get published. So the fact that I am interviewing not only immigrants, but that they published a book and that they're like, that is huge to me. Because again, English is most likely not their native language. It's probably either their second or third or even fourth. And so the fact that they published a book, like I admire that as a writer, I admire that. So I make it a point to read their book before I record with them, ask them about the writing process, ask them about like when did they knew that they wanted to write a book. And my most recent guest that she published a book, she told me, she was like, you're the first person to read my book before interviewing. And I'm like,
oh, wow.
How do people not read? Yeah. How do they not read your book before interviewing an author? That just to me was just mind blowing. And when we were recording, like I brought up, a few stories and she was like, I am very impressed by how much you remember from my book. And I was like, well, it was an amazing book. Like I'm going to highlight that. Like I'm going to make it a big deal because it is a big deal. Yes. So yeah, those are a few things that I've learned doing this podcast.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's I thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I can't believe that either because I do as well read the book for if it's an author. I think that's the sign of respect, right? Like if you're gonna bring them
Yeah.
on and you're gonna talk about what they're doing in their boat, then of course read it.
Yep.
But I want to go back to a few things because you just shared so much. Like you just
Oh,
taught
sorry.
me, because I know I haven't listened to every single episode of
Yeah.
that you published, but I knew about the domestic violence one, and I've heard
Hmm.
one of your episodes on that. I actually know somebody who got their permanent residency through that. It was her husband, and it's
Hmm.
really awful that these same people threaten to to report them to ICE or to Homeland
Yeah.
Security if they try to leave them. You know, it's just
Yeah.
horrible. I also volunteered with a nonprofit organization that helps immigrants. So I learned a little bit about different situations, and it's just incredible how much we don't know about all of these immigration processes. But one that I just realized, as you were saying this, is that not all attorneys know or are well versed in that type of
Yeah.
immigration status, that situation,
Yes.
because I helped make phone calls for some of these people, and I remember speaking to so many attorneys, and now I can tell which ones are the crappy ones because I've spoken to
Mm.
so many, like trying to vet them,
Yeah.
and which ones would be good. And
Hmm.
it is so sad that a lot of people who don't know this, especially immigrants who need it most. So,
Hmm.
um, but I want to go back to something that you said. A lot of them are business owners. So I got to go back to Nicaragua as an adult in 2016, and one of the things that I noticed was that everybody and the mama sells something from their house, and it's not just one
Oh.
thing. Like they sell multiple things. Like una señora, she'll have like the tortillas ready in the morning, or the bread and the frijoles, the beans and all, and then like the whole neighborhood or the whole community knows that so and so on this block
Yeah.
sells this, and then la otra, she sells like clothing, or she makes clothing, and the other one is a carpenter. And
Yes.
so it doesn't surprise me that the majority of your guests have been entrepreneurs, because I feel like and it's not just Latin America, I think it's everywhere, except in the United States or maybe Canada, because like the more developed countries, like
Yeah.
people are too comfortable, that they don't feel like they
Yeah.
have to have that side hustle. I mean, that has changed over the years here in the United States
Yeah.
because the economy has been so wackadoodle, but it's still nothing compared to when you go to another country and you realize everybody has entrepreneurship in them because they're trying
Hmm.
to make another stream of revenue. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed that too, and I love it. I just wish people would just blast this information out there, because I think it would definitely change the way that the narrative is discussed in the media about immigrants.
Yeah.
It
Yep. And
is
that's the
so,
mission of my podcast
yeah.
is to change the narrative of immigration.
And for that reason, please tell people where to find it. Go ahead.
You can listen to the American Dream and the Eyes of Immigrants podcast literally wherever you listen to podcasts. I just recently found this link where it had like where it's all like where you can listen to it, and it was like over 20 different apps, and I had no idea you could even listen in that many apps, but
Right.
it's so crazy. So you can listen on Spotify, you can listen on Apple. It is on YouTube. YouTube has the videos if you want to see the person that is speaking. Um, yeah, so wherever you listen to podcasts, you can just find it. If even if you have an Alexa, you can tell her, Alexa, play the American
Right.
Dream and the Eyes of
Yeah.
Immigrants podcast, and she'll start playing
And
it.
if you happen to be traveling outside of the country, get the VPN and download it before you enter that other country so you can continue to listen to it. but
Aw,
yeah, I mean, I learned that too because I'm planning a lot of travel in my life. Things have
good,
changed.
good.
So yeah, it's just amazing. Once
Yes.
your kids are a lot older, now I have an adult and the other one's about to be an adult. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can plan trips and not have to worry about babysitting or
Yeah.
any of that. And they don't want to come with me for some of these, and they want to be home alone, and for some they want to tag along, and I'm cool with that. But the other thing that you mentioned about all of your guests is the education. A lot of them, this is what surprised me. I learned this in the military. I was sitting at home and I invited some people over, and one of the guys, one of the rare ones that I found, was Nicaraguense. He was an engineer in Nicaragua, and he
Mm.
came to the US. And the story is kind of funny and sad at the same time, but he kind of like misunderstood because of the language barrier about him having to enlist. He was supposed to enlist in the selective service like every other man in or male in
Mm.
the United States at the age of 18, but his aunt, because she wasn't very knowledgeable and misunderstood, told him he had to enlist in the military. So he gave up
Oh.
his well-paying engineer job in Nicaragua, came to the US
Oh
thinking
no.
he had to enlist first and then pursue his engineer career afterwards. So that's how I ended up meeting
Oh.
him. But very, very well educated people from all over the world. They come here and they have to sometimes like redo a whole process just to have their
Oh
education
my God,
validated.
yes.
That was
Mm-hmm.
baffling. That's baffling. And I think it's kind of arrogant for the United States to think, well, we don't know how good your
Yeah.
university is, you know? So we're gonna have
Yeah.
you do this all over again. Yeah. And
Yeah. I working in the medical field, I in particularly there was a primary care of our company. Well, I want to say company because they had different offices, different locations, and then they had a corporate office. And yeah, there were so many. There a lot of us were Hispanics because we, live in Central Florida, heavy populated Hispanic people here, and I can't tell you how many medical assistants I met that were nurses back in their home country or doctors,
mhm,
and case managers too. A lot of the case managers were actually doctors back in their home country. Some of them were trying to go through the process to get licensed here. But there was this one particular lady, she was like, no, I don't feel like going through all of that again. Like, she was like, I did so many years of medical school back home. I don't, she didn't want to go through all of that again. And so yeah, so learning about like attorneys and back in their home countries or accountants, like, like you said, very well educated professionals who unfortunately would have to like either redo or do tests and things to like be certified or whatever here in the United States because the United States doesn't quote unquote see their credentials. Like
right.
it's yeah, baffling to me
Right.
as well.
You know, in a way, I do see that you do have to make sure that it's accredited. But I think that the extent that they go to, I mean, by now you should know that
Yeah.
certain universities are accredited. So why make those people go through that same process over and over every single time? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so right now, if you could amplify a message to all of those people who are anti-immigrants, what would you want to say to them?
I would want to say to them that listen to people's stories. I think that's the biggest thing because when you hear people's stories, you will know that it's not as easy as the media likes to paint it. These people are not bad people coming to do bad things to the United States. Al contrario, how do you even say that in English?
Otherwise, or oh no, hold
Yeah.
on. Al contrario is
See,
yeah.
as a
I know
matter of
it's
fact, they're
yeah. As a matter of fact,
yeah, as a matter of fact, they're here to like because they want opportunities. They follow the laws. They create businesses. Like they're not here to do bad things. Or like they're here to find a better life for themselves and their families. Usually that's what it is. And because our system is so outdated and it's so complex, it's not like how people say, like, oh, get in line, wait your turn. Like there is no line, there's no waiting your turn. And this country was built as the land of opportunity, as the land of the American dream, as come here and you can do anything. And then it's like people are coming here because they want to do anything, and then like we're shutting our doors. So like it just doesn't make sense in my head. Um, if anything, that's just it's been a marketing tactic to bring more immigrants to the U.S. But it's a lot deeper than what people think it is. I mean, we could have a whole episode about how the United States had its hand in the politics of Central America and Latin America, and that created the economic effects that have brought a lot of people. Like we could get into all of that in a whole other episode, but it's not as simple as the media make it seems like it is. And the only way that we can find out about this is if we talk to people, listen to their stories, but also educate ourselves. Like, when you do see a big wave of immigrants coming from a certain country, like stop and think like, okay, what is going on in that country that's bringing all these people over? Because I guarantee you, people don't want to leave their home country. They don't want to leave their culture and their family unless they have to. So it's just like, kind of do that critical thinking, like, okay, so what's going on in their country? What's going on? And what does the US has to do with what's going on? I'm kidding. Kidding, but not kidding.
No, but I get it, because politics has been in Latin America and continues to be in Latin America. There is a system because, the marketing has worked, like you said. And now that the marketing has worked, well, it has always worked. How can you be mad that it's working and people are trying to come here? Like, what kind of business person are you? Because in all, the United States is treated like a business. It's about making money. That's what they always prioritize.
Yes.
It is exactly that. Business. Enormous. And we all contributed to it. And I think that that's why it is so important for all of us to speak up and let our legislators know what it is that we want with that money that's being taxed to be done, right? You're absolutely right. Hearing the stories, because I do know that there are people who still listen to the stories and still deny, and it's because they haven't heard enough of those stories. I think it's the media has so much power, and of course, in a wonderful dream, I wish that the media would do the right thing and depict things the way that they really are, instead of softening words where it shouldn't be, and then saying what like giving the facts of what's going on. But that's why we have people like you to help with that, and hopefully people will share your podcast. And I tell people, you know what, even if you know you're not going to have time to support somebody's podcast, play it in the background. Yeah, you might not be hearing, you might not be given 100% of your attention to it, but you're going to catch a few things. And you're also supporting that podcast with the algorithm and more listens and all of that, and share it with other people. Like, one of the things that I do, since I know my teens roll their eyes because mom's listening to one of her nerdy things again, I just play it in the car because they can't go anywhere.
So, there you go. Yes.
Sometimes when I'm cleaning, they come down.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you listening to? And at first they're like, ugh, but then they're like, what? And they'll start to comment. And I'm like, oh, so they are listening. And I tell them, I just don't want you to be one of those ignorant people that thinks all of these horrible things about others. Do not be that person.
I'm big on getting my daughter to read because of that. Reading books, and like right now, obviously she's reading for leisure, right? To Diary of Wimpy Kid and things like that. Right. But I want her to develop the habit or the love of reading, so then eventually she can start reading books that will educate her, like history books and things like that. Because this is exactly what I told her. I was like, knowledge is something that no one can take away from you. And if you know the truth, if you know what actually happened, some ignorant people can come up to you and be like, no, X, Y, and Z happened. And you know that that's not true. You're not going to be able to get swept away in that ignorance or try to be convinced otherwise, because you know the truth. So I was telling her, I was like, this is why I want you to read books, or eventually when she's older, I'll tell her to listen to podcasts. But right now I'm like, reading is so important because that's how you learn and that's how you grow. And I want you to know the truth. And I've said this before, especially living in Florida, like education starts at home. Education here in Florida is very whitewashed, and it's trending to get worse. And so I question my daughter, like, oh, hey, what are you learning? What have you been told? and things like that. And if there's anything that I have to tell her, okay, well, that's half true. Here's what happened. I will do so. Or I'll have, we'll watch like documentaries as a family, and things like that, just so I make sure that she understands history and the truth. Because growing up, I didn't realize how much the curriculum in the school that I went to like really lacked history like that.
Yes,
And like
yes.
even the history that we did learn, like it wasn't like the full picture and things like that. And so I'm now that I'm an adult, I'm very intentional with, documentaries, podcasts, reading and stuff like that, and making sure that I am educated on certain topics. And I want my daughter and eventually my son the same, because, I was like, I don't want you to be swept up in what people think. It's like, no, know the truth. This is what happened, and you can educate others.
Right, right. I completely agree, because I had that same emphasis when my kids were younger, and I did the books thing. And I remember it was really hard to get them to read the biographies and the nonfiction
Yeah.
books. They're like, oh, that's so boring. But the key is just, I guess, like finding a really good one so that they can get hooked. And
Yeah.
I went through waves with them. Like they did really, really well. And they were reading like the bigger, like the Odyssey and all of that eventually, which I was so proud. And then suddenly they'd go through like months of just not picking up a book at all. And then I realized, oh, and then they picked it up again. So it's like, just so you know, since yours are still little,
Okay.
that'll happen.
Thank you.
Don't get discouraged as long as you continue to do. And also when they watch you, of course, do it. They're most likely.
Yep.
But yeah, the cool part would be too, this is something that just popped in my head. What about you interviewing some of the kids of your guests, like the ones that are little right now, to ask them,
oh my goodness,
like a special segment, right? Like a special, like, I don't know,
that is really
like
interesting.
like a 12-part series or something, or maybe smaller. It was like, hey, what do you think about the US right now? Because I wish that somebody would have captured that and asked me that when I was little, because I'm sure I'm of course my answers would be so different, because now in hindsight you recognize what you were going through at the moment, and back then I wouldn't have known. But that would be really interesting, especially like flavors. That's one of the things that I hear so much from a lot of people, a lot of immigrants that have come the last 5 years. They always say the food here tastes different, even when I cook from scratch. There's something in the flour.
It does.
There's something in, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why we're all, like
Yep, that's a whole episode right there.
And
yes.
Exercise and it's like, and a lot of people,
so I go ahead.
No, I was gonna say a lot of these people that I speak to, they've decided, this is before all the chaos started with the new administration, they decided to leave the country and go back to where they came from, because they realized that life here, according to them, is more about work, 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 and less living. And that broke my heart, because I was like, wow, so that is how immigrants see us now. Now we're just surviving, and they're choosing. They're like, nope, I don't like this. I'm going back, or I'm going to a different country, because they focus more on family and health and all of that. And here in the US, it's about making money, making money, making money.
Yeah,
that was a big eye opener.
Yeah. Our episode will be released in October, but I had one of my first guests, I think she was like episode 9, was Rosalba. She came from Mexico at the age of 17, because her mom had just passed. And her mom had just came past. And so to her American dream was just like, okay, I'm gonna go to the United States, pack tomatoes, get the money and send it back to my family, because she was the eldest daughter. And so that was her American dream. It was like, just pack tomatoes, get the money and send it back to my family. And so she was on the podcast, and I actually got connected with her daughter, and her daughter now started Latinas in Podcasting, and she did a whole summit last year. And so I was able to speak at that summit. And so like now we're like internet friends. And so I interviewed her. So I have that mother-daughter duo. Her episode will release later in October, but her mom episode released when I first started the podcast, which I thought was really cool, because it's like I had her mom perspective when she came at 17, and then now I have her daughter's perspectives, which is like growing up with her mom is Mexican and then her dad was Puerto Rican. So it was like growing up with both cultures. So I have that. But that would be really interesting to like interview kids and see how like their experiences of coming to the United States and what their thoughts are of living in this country. That would be very, very
that would be fun too. I'm sure they would say some pretty funny stuff. You know, kids can say the darnest things.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow. Well, thank you so much for coming back to the Dali Talks podcast and sharing more about your wonderful work. And I hope that your podcast continues to get the attention that it deserves. And if you have any launches or anything, if you have another book, did you mention about your books that you're a publisher? You have the diaries?
I have a poetry book.
Yeah, the poetry.
I have my poetry book, and then I had the journals, but I had to discontinue to just focus on the podcast. So because it was a lot. But yeah, I think back then when I first came on, I had the journals and stuff in the notebooks, and I just remember like I didn't even get to mention my trip to Mexico that I just recently went to on the border to learn.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. I had it. Yes. Please. No. Wait. We're gonna go a little longer.
I forgot.
Do you have time?
Okay.
Sure. We do it.
Yes. Whatever you want. I can briefly share, and then if you want to do a part 2, we can do that too. But I had the opportunity to go to Mexico with 2 Christian organizations. One is called We Choose Welcome, which their mission is literally to just like provide facts of immigration and provide prayers and like how people can get involved with immigration. And then the second organization is Abara, and they are actually in El Paso, and then they have an office in Juarez. So they host a group of people with We Choose Welcome, and it was a 3-day trip. So I went to El Paso, and then we went over to Mexico that Wednesday of that week. And it was just a learning experience, learning firsthand like what the community in El Paso is doing on the U.S. side of things, and then going over to Juarez and seeing what the Mexico community is doing on their side of things when it comes to immigration. And so we got to learn like, real numbers of things like facts and stuff that is actually happening down in the border. And then it was crazy because I went at the end of January. So it was like the new administration's second week in. Right. And literally all the changes that were going on, we were like seeing it firsthand how it was affecting. So when we went to Juarez, we got to go to a shelter to meet immigrants who literally had been waiting months to get an appointment through the app, which was completely shut down. And because it was shut down, a lot of them were like, well, now we're kind of in limbo. We don't know what to do because that was one of the pathways to come. And I met this family from Venezuela. They had, traveled all the way from Venezuela for a few months. And she was like, we had been, sleeping in the streets wherever we could find. And then finally they came to the shelter. But then now they were still in limbo because, the app was gone. And then on our way back from Juarez, we actually saw deportees from the United States, on the Mexico side of things. So we were like walking towards the bridge to walk back to the US, and there was just like a lot of National Guards and the guns and everything, and we're like what's going on? And then towards the side we saw like 3 vans, and it was confirmed that there were deportees in those vans, and that's why the National Guard was there. And it just infuriated me. Like so many emotions on this trip, but like in that moment, I was just so upset again of just everything that was going on. So it was just like, we just saw things firsthand, right then and there of like the changes that was going on. And it was very impactful. But one thing that I realized on this trip was I know a lot more about immigration than I thought I did. Because one of the days, like they really go into like I said, like not just immigration here in the United States, but they actually talk about the global effect. Because when you look at it in a global space, like the U.S. really doesn't bring in that much refugees.
Yeah.
If anything, I think it's like less than 3% of the refugee population that we actually accept, which is really, really a low number. So when they got into like the history and looking at like the bigger picture stuff, I was like, yeah, like I know this. I know this. So it was very eye opening for me to like realize that I actually know more about immigration and stuff like that than what I actually thought I did. But I would like to eventually like to go into more details on my own podcast because I do write interview on my podcast, but a lot of people have been telling me that they would be interested in listening to like solo episodes about the trip. So I'm kind of planning to do like an in-depth like day 1, day 2, day 3 series. So I got to get that outlined and recorded and put that out on the podcast. But it was a very impactful trip. I'm very thankful that I was able to do it, and I really was hit with privilege. I felt like it was like a slap in the face with my privilege because the mom of the Venezuelan family, she was like, so you can just come and go, right? Like really easily. And I was like, yes, but this is the first time. I was like, yeah, but this is the first time I'm coming to Mexico. But that really hit me. Like the privilege, like, yes, I'm able, every time I say that, I get chills. But she was saying how, and then she was like asking me questions about the United States, like the food and the people and everything, because I was from the place that she wanted to go, and they were like trying to get like that glimpse of the United States in some way through me. And it was like, it hit me hard. Like I got emotional, and yeah, it was like a slap in the face. Like, you don't know the privilege that you have. And, that moment really made me realize, like, even though, because, here in the United States, like as a Latina woman, we have our own struggles,
right?
But when you're put in a different position, we have privilege. Like I being an American citizen, like there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. So it was very eye opening for me in that sense. But I'm really glad I was able to go on the trip, and pretty soon I would like to share more in details of how it was and how people can sign up and join if they are interested as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, we definitely need to have a part 2 then, because I know I saw your post on social media, the picture of you by the fence and all that, and I was like, that has to be so heart-wrenching to see so much in such a small amount of time, and feel like you can't do enough or anything at all for them. The thing that's really killing me right now is all of these little babies that have to go face an immigration judge. And they have no...
By themselves.
Exactly. Even when they did have legal representation, they don't know what the heck is going on. These babies, and then to live in a world where you just allow that to happen. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, and I don't want to end it on a sad note. So I'm going to try to lift it up again. Tell me about one of the most fun interviews, the first one that pops into your head that you've had, one of the most fun interviews.
Oh, most fun interviews. I was in the very beginning, I interviewed my husband, his sister, and his brother. And I feel like that was so much fun because, like I said, my husband was 9 when he came. His sister was 10, and then his brother was 14. So even though they all came at the same time together, all 3 of them, like they have different memories of like what happened and like, their own perspective and their own experience. So like sitting at the table with them, and then like his sister saying like, no, that didn't happen that way. And then it was like, well, that's how I remember it. It was like, it was just fun to interview them. So I think that's the first one that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I like that. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that one. And what about one of like an organization that you think people should look into or donate their time or money or things to?
Oh my gosh, definitely the 2 that I went to the trip with. We Choose Welcome. You can find them on immigrant. Oh my gosh, you can find them on Instagram. Exactly like that. The handle We Choose Welcome, and they are faith-based organizations, and so they do provide like resources and things like that. And lately they've been providing petitions for us to sign. And then they like print them out, and then they've been sending it over to the administration to have our voices be heard, which I love that they're doing that. And then the other one is Abara. They are the ones that are in El Paso and in Juarez. They are actually, Abaro right now is actually accepting donations to expand their building. So they actually took over a historic restaurant in El Paso called La Hacienda, and they were gonna tear it down, but then Abara took it over, and they're raising money to revamp the restaurant so then they can host more educational classes. And then they're also taking donations right now to be able to purchase the 2 buildings that are next to it, so they can turn those into apartment buildings. So then, like when groups come, they can host them there versus having to book out hotel rooms for people.
Okay.
So
Wonderful.
we choose Welcome in Abara.
Okay, Abara is Abara, right?
RA. Yeah, it's actually an Arabic word which we learned on our trip. Yeah, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I thought it was in Spanish.
Right, because there's a lot of words in Arabic that are also in Spanish, like same word, and they mean the same thing too. So I learned that too. But okay, we can talk forever.
I know.
We did this last time. Okay, well, thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much for the work that you do, for making time to share about your podcast and everything that you've learned. You will be back a 3rd time. You said you would.
Yay. So I'm gonna hold you to it. Okay.
But thank you so much, and the best to you.
Thank you, Dali, so much for hosting me for a 2nd time. And I will definitely be glad to come back for a 3rd.